As talks between US and Iran continue to remain stalled, conflicting narratives are coming out from the Trump administration. Days after the US announced Project Freedom to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz, US President Donald Trump said that he is halting the operation in a bid to reach a deal with Iran. Trump made the announcement in a post on Truth Social, saying that he was pausing Project Freedom following a request by mediator Pakistan and other countries. Meanwhile, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has warned Iran that any attack on commercial shipping in Hormuz will be met with a devastating response.
But it's defensive in nature. This is defensive. So if you hear stories about attacks and launching of firing back and forth, it's not back and forth. We are only responding if attacked first. This is a defensive operation, and that's what's occurring here.
Meanwhile, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has warned Iran that any attack on commercial shipping in Hormuz will be met with a devastating response. The Pentagon chief said that the US is not looking for a fight, but will also not hold back if attacked by Iran.
To what remains of Iran's forces, if you attack American troops or innocent commercial shipping, you will face overwhelming and devastating American firepower. The President has been very clear about this.
The comments have raised questions about whether there is confusion and differences within the Trump administration over the Iran war. Separately, while speaking to reporters at the Oval Office, Trump accused Iran of playing games and said Tehran's military has been completely destroyed, leaving them with no option but to plead for a deal with the United States.
With fighters and bombers.
On the other hand, Iran has signaled that it does not intend to agree to US demands. Speaking to Iranian media, President Masoud Pezeshkian accused the US of pursuing a policy of maximum pressure to force Iran to surrender to its unilateral demands. Pezeshkian asserted that meeting such a demand was impossible. The US strategy for now seems to have pivoted away from aggressive military action to choking the Iranian economy with a naval blockade, forcing Tehran to come to the negotiating table and agree to concessions sought by the United States.
Mr. President, thank you. When Iran is seeing 50% inflation, they've moved money from their sovereign
wealth. Their economy is crashing.
Would you allow their financial system then to fail?
Well, I guess so, because we're making it fail, right?
Is that what it takes?
I hope it fails.
Is that what it takes?
You know why? Because I want to win. No, it takes getting pounded on by the military, I think, for more. But in addition to that, it is failing.
This project steadily progresses. Operation Economic Fury, continues to impose maximum pressure on the Iranian regime and what remains of their already frail economy. Today, inflation in Iran is 70%, and their currency is in total and complete freefall. The U.S. sanctions enforcement is stepping up. It's moving in lockstep with the naval blockade to degrade Iran's capacity to generate, to move, and repatriate revenue. It directly targets the regime's primary revenue lifelines.
Now, amid these developments, the big question is, has Iran exposed the limits of U.S. military might? At the beginning of the war, Trump had claimed that the U.S. would finish the war in 4 to 5 weeks. However, since then, both the timeline and U.S. objectives in the war have changed frequently. The retreat on Project Freedom suggests that the U.S. may no longer rely on military moves to force a deal. But will this lead to a breakthrough, or will the stalemate on talks linger on? We'll have to wait and watch.
In.
And for more on this, we're now being joined by Tom Cooper. He's a renowned Austrian military and aviation analyst and historian. Expert in Middle Eastern Air Forces, he joins us from Austria. We're also being joined by Jane Kinnenmont, CEO, United Nations Association UK, and she joins us from London. Thank you so much both for making time and joining us on the broadcast. Now, of course, the larger question that we're dealing with is, has the Iran war exposed the limits of US's military might? Because a conflict which was ideally slated to be wrapped up within 4 to 5 weeks has now entered its third month with no clear breakthrough in sight. Jane, what's your assessment?
Military might is certainly on the US's side. It has by far the largest army in the world and the biggest military spending. But the successful use of military power is not just about the hardware, the troops, and the capability. It is about strategy and endurance, among many other things. So a lot of the US's weakness here is really a political weakness and not a military weakness. Iran is a weaker state in many ways, but it has been betting it will have more staying power than the US. And at the end of the day, the Iranian leadership have seen this war as an existential war for them, because from the beginning it was using the language of regime change. So they have a lot to lose. Whereas for the US, this is not an existential war. This is a war very far away from its own territory. And ultimately, it can walk away with limited ill effect. So there's a difference when it comes to political will.
Right, we hear you, Jane, and while you think the military might is on the US's side, I'm also curious to know, Tom's perspective on this. Do you think that Iran this war has actually exposed the limits of US's military might, or do you think this is perhaps simply the reality of confronting an adversary like Iran, according to you, Tom?
Well, I do think that it is so that Iran was preparing for precisely this kind of war for decades already, and has developed its armed forces precisely for fighting this kind of war. So even although it is clearly inferior in comparison to United States military power, not to talk about a combined military power of United States, Israel, and United Arab Emirates, it is well prepared for fighting precisely this kind of a war. That means its primary means of fighting this war, this is ballistic missiles and UAVs, are well hidden under the ground and surviving. The mass of them is surviving whatever the United States or its allies are throwing or dropping upon Iran. And that is the point. The United States have had to acknowledge that after 4 weeks of bombardment, Iranian military power is around and can hit back and cause punishment, which is also again along, well, precisely along Iranian strategy. That means Iran is there, and it cannot be simply discounted and said, okay, now their navy is defeated, their air force is defeated, and so on. Navy might be sunk, but there is an IRGC Navy, which is a separate branch of armed forces, and it is around, and it is in control of the Hormuz Strait, as we have seen it even in the last 2 days. So what the United States are now doing is actually exactly the same like Emirates, which is lying all the time, explaining how we are posed and so on and so on. Actually, they are able to run only this one short operation, bring one U.S. flagged merchant out of the or the Persian Gulf through the Hormuz, escorted by 2 U.S. Navy warships. Iranians have targeted in turn 5 other warships, sorry, not warships, but merchants, which did not move out of the no-go zone they have declared on 3rd of May. And that's it. Now the Americans, they have seen, okay, they have to mobilize an aircraft carrier, actually 3 aircraft carriers. They have to bring aircraft to United Arab Emirates. They had to deploy 20 tankers in support of this operation. This is very expensive to bring just one merchant out of the Persian Gulf. So it's not paying off. This is why this operation has been paused now.
Right, we hear you, Tom, and we understand that the Strait of Hormuz has become this major flashpoint, but we're also hearing mixed signals coming in from Washington, where President Trump is saying that Project Freedom is paused. Marco Rubio is saying that the military campaign is over, while Pete Hegseth is saying that the ceasefire is not over just yet. Now, these comments have created a lot of confusion, and the lack of a coherent messaging coming from the Trump administration. It's raised the question if there is any coherent strategy at all, or is the administration just improvising as it goes along? What's your assessment on that, Tom?
There is no strategy in Washington at all. Trump has been convinced to go into this war by Israelis first and foremost, and the United Arab Emirates joined the coalition and pushed hard for the aggression on Iran. But Trump has no strategy on his own. So what the reason why he launched the strikes was that the Israelis convinced him that everything is going to be over in a matter of few days. So kind of a special military operation, and just bomb Iran a little bit, and then the regime is going to collapse. But Trump, as such, has no own strategy for this war. Or if he has any, then to manipulate the market so he can enrich himself privately, himself and his clan. He has earned several billions since late February already, just through manipulating the markets. So this is what works for him. Otherwise, this is absolutely uninteresting for him.
Now, Jane, I'm curious to know how you are reading into this. Do you think it's perhaps strategic ambiguity to keep Iran guessing, or would you agree with Tom that there is a clear lack of coherent objectives coming in from Washington at this point?
I do agree with Tom. I mean, I think the US military establishment has also been preparing for potential scenarios of war with Iran for a long time. But the political strategy is very much dependent on the president, and he is a president who is mercurial. He changes his views a lot. You could say really that his whims are changing from day to day. And so that does mean that strategy is lacking. It does also mean that he's quite capable of doing U-turns and pivoting towards some kind of deal rather than continuing an ideologically motivated war. So there is some scope for diplomacy and for compromise there. But at the end of the day, either fighting Iran or negotiating with Iran does take a lot of patience and a lot of attention to detail. And so far, it does seem that that's lacking from the current administration. This is an administration that came in with an almost revolutionary kind of way of thinking. They take the view that the traditional diplomatic establishment is corrupt or wrong-headed. They are sacking many experienced diplomats. They don't want to listen to experts. But now I think they are beginning to see that there is some downside of that, because a lot of the knowledge that has been built up in the US about how Iran works has just been ignored in the planning for this ill-fated war.
Right, Jane, at this point, US and Iran seem to be playing very different games with very different rules of engagement, and by the virtue of that, very different definitions of victory and defeat as well. They both want a deal, no doubt about that, but they have very different deals in mind, and both of them, I think we can say that they are fundamentally incompatible with each other, at least at this point. Now, until one or the other, or preferably both, decide to offer any concessions, the risk of sliding back into an all-out conflict remains pretty high. Now, do you think there could be peace without a deal at all? Do you think that kind of a scenario is at all plausible? Jane?
This is where the multilateral system and the rest of the world really need to speak up with their ideas, because it is quite possible that these two countries will fail to get a deal, that they'll keep butting heads, and that they'll be quite arrogant about standing for their own demands and red lines. But clearly, this conflict is costing a lot for the global economy in a way that is having ripple effects for literally everybody when it comes to fuel prices, food prices, the prices of air travel, and the impacts on social division, radicalisation, all of these sorts of things. So the rest of the world should be pushing for a compromise deal. It's not so very difficult to imagine. We already had a successful nuclear deal between the P5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and Iran over the nuclear programme. That could be bolstered with an agreement to respect freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz and a general ceasefire in the Middle East. It's not like it's easy, but you can imagine the outlines of it, a deal from which the whole world would benefit.
Of course, and the situation does remain delicate, and we'll have to wait and see how both sides recalibrate their next moves. But for now, thank you so much, Tom and Jane, for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspectives with us.